recursion. See the recursion there? So I wanted to sort of give a little thing about recursion, right? So, this truth finding, that was copied from my 1090 slides, so that was a mistake. Anyway, we're thinking about a recursive algorithm in various ways, not truth finding algorithm, right? The strong induction, right? This is kind of what I was saying. You assume by way of induction that you can produce strings of up until some length I, and now how do you produce them of length I plus 1, right? That's one way of looking at it. Or you can think recursion, you can get your friend to build anything of length I, and then you build length I plus 1, right? And so here, this grammar, right? Somehow you think, what's the problem? Well, somehow I'm given a Q, and maybe I'm given an N, and I need to produce A N's followed by a pound followed by D N's, right? And how do I do that? Well, I get help from my friends, right? And I can give any input to my friend that's smaller. So maybe I give her a Q and an N minus 1, right? And so what does she do? Well, by magic, she produces that, right? And then what do? I build my solution from her solution. I just say, well, what do I want to build? I want to build this. Well, what's that? It has an A in the beginning and a D at the end. And I get my friend to do in the middle. And so that's, everybody got, you probably had that already, but maybe it helped. Anyway, that's what we're doing here, right? My friend is building this, and I tack an A on it. All right, so we want to do that spewing thing to make this all longer, but then we need brackets on the outside, right? How can we get those brackets on the outside? Right? Remember the rules. What I said was break things into concatenations and spewing, right? So in some ways, these should be handled separately, and so let's call this, it's a list, right? It's not a tuple, it's a list, right? And what do we want to call one of these things? Well, it's a list of what? Well, let's call it a list of I's, right? So what is a list? Well, it can be what? What's a list? An I, comma, what? Oh, no, I mean, this whole thing here could be an I. Here, let's say what a list, we want a list to be. We want a list to be a list of I's, right? So what is our grammar? Our grammar could say, well, it could be an I followed by a comma followed by a list, right? That spews these things out, right? Does that make sense? And how does this end? No, because this doesn't have any brackets in it. It ends with an I, right? Because a list could be an I by itself. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah? Well, empty lists are also scary. So let's hold that thought and try to fix it at the end. All right? So let's start off with saying you can't have empty. I mean, can we have? Is this legal? Yeah, it should be legal. But let's add it later, and because it's going to cause some problems. All right? So let's first get it to work, and then we'll add it, and we'll see what bugs it creates. All right? So everybody see we have a list here? All right, so now, what can an I be? It could be an L, or it could be an integer. Right? Everybody happy with that? And then we can come back here to a list. What can a list be? Oh, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. Let's first come over here and say, what can a list be? What's a tuple? A bracket, then an L, then a bracket, right? So that's what a tuple is. What do we want an I to be? An integer? Well, how are we going to produce this? This is a tuple of i's. This one here. It's a tuple, right? Because we could even stick in here. This could be 2, 7, 8, right? It's a tuple of tuples, right? So what is an I? It could be a tuple, just like remember we did expressions. An expression, what was it? Factor, right? What could a factor be? It could be an integer, or it could be an expression in brackets, right? In fact, we could get rid of this tuple concept, and right here's another option. This is another possible grammar. We could just say, what is an I? Well, it's either an integer or it's a list in brackets, right? I mean, it's just a little shorter, but it's the same idea. Everybody kind of buy that? Yeah? This here, from here to here, is an L. In fact, why don't we parse this thing? All right? Let's bring over here a tuple is a list, or I mean, in some ways, this one thing that's nice about this is 5. Is it a tuple? I don't know. It's a sort of a question of aesthetics, but it doesn't feel like a tuple to me, right? And that's why the problem with this guy is all we have with i's, which, right, we don't distinguish. Well, here a T actually needs brackets around it, right? So let's parse this. We might not get the numbers the same, but we'll get the concept right. Right? What's a tuple? Well, it's a bracket followed by a bracket followed with a list in the middle, right? And what's a list? It's an I. It's an I followed by a list, which is an I followed by a list, which is an I followed by a list, which is an I. Oh, and what do we have in between? We have commas, right? And why did we drop an I instead of an empty string? Well, one, because empty strings, we are nervous about empty strings. But two, we got to make sure, we got to be nervous about commas. In fact, that's why, let's go back to his question about empty strings, why I don't want to include the empty string is because then I can say, what is a list? Well, a list is an I, comma, list. And what is a list? A list is the empty string, right? And then I'm getting an I, comma, empty string. Right? People see that? And that doesn't look nice. That's why I don't have the empty string here. There needs to be commas between them. That's why I end with an I. Right? Does that make sense? Now, we can ask, well, what happens if you want the empty tuple? Right? We want to include just brackets. How do we add that to our grammar? Where? In the T?
Yeah. Bracket, empty string.
Right? We can just add it there. Right? And it's nice because it doesn't have any brackets. All right, so or commas. All right, so let's now do, what is these I's? Well, each of these I's is going to turn into a T. Oh, no, some of them might not. This I might turn into a 5. And this I might turn into a 7. All right, so what do we, everybody kind of follow that? And so, everybody got this down already? I'm gonna rewrite it. Right? What is this going to? This is going to a tuple, comma, 5, comma, tuple, comma, 8. Right? This went to an I, which went to that. Right? And now each of these get parsed. Right? This one could go to 3, 8, 7, tuple, 3, 2, n tuple, right? This could go to that. And this tuple could go to the empty tuple. Right? Does that make sense? And what are we getting? We're getting bracket, sequence 5, bracket 8, bracket. Right? Does that make sense? So this is certainly a question that you should be able to do. And if I'm not mistaken, I've had it on tests, and it's presently in the that list of things. Right?